The boys, as they talked to the girls from Marcia Blaine's school, stood on the far side of their bicycles, holding the handlebars, which established a protective fence of bicycle between the sexes, and the impression that at any moment the boys were likely to be away. The 5 girls formed the Brodie set. That was what they had been called even before the headmistress had given them the name in scorn, when they had moved from the junior to the senior school at the age of 12. At that time, they had been immediately recognisable as Miss Brodie's pupils, being vastly informed on a lot of subjects irrelevant to the authorised curriculum. These girls were discovered to have heard of Mussolini, the Italian Renaissance painters, the advantages to the skin of cleansing cream and witch hazel over honest soap and water, and the word ménage. All of the Brodie set, save one, counted on its fingers with accurate results, more or less. By the time they were 16 and had reached the 4th form, the girls who loitered beneath the tree were all famous for something. Monica Douglas was famous mostly for mathematics, which she could do in her brain, and for her anger. Rose Stanley was famous for sex. Eunice Gardner was famous for her sprightly gymnastics. Sandy Stranger was merely notorious for her small, almost non-existent eyes, but being half English, she was famous for her vowel sounds. Jenny Gray was the prettiest girl of the set, and this was her fame. Along came Mary McGregor, the last member of the set, whose fame rested on her being a nobody whom everybody could blame. With her was an outsider, Joyce Emily Hammond, their delinquent, who had been recently sent to Blaine as a last hope. Joyce Emily said, "There's a teacher coming out." "Good afternoon," said Miss Brodie, when she approached the group. "I think we won't detain these young men and their bicycles." The famous set moved off with her. Joyce walked in the opposite direction. "I should like you girls to come to supper tomorrow night," Miss Brodie said. "I have to consult you about a new plot which is afoot, to force me to resign. It has been suggested again that I should apply for a post at one of the progressive schools, where my methods would be more suited to the system than they are at Blaine. But I shall not apply for a post at a crank school. I shall remain at this education factory. There needs must be a leaven in the lump. Give me a girl at an impressionable age, and she is mine for life." The Brodie set did not for a moment doubt that she would prevail. 6 years previously, Miss Brodie had led her new class into the garden for a history lesson underneath the big elm. On the way through the school corridors, they passed the headmistress's study. "Little girls," said Miss Brodie, "come and observe this." They clustered round the open door while she pointed to a large poster on the wall within the room. "This is Stanley Baldwin, who got in as Prime Minister and got out again ere long. Miss Mackay retains him on the wall because she believes in the slogan, 'Safety first.' But safety does not come first. Goodness, truth, and beauty come first. Follow me." This was the first intimation to the girls of an odds between Miss Brodie and the rest of the teaching staff. Taking inward note of this, they followed dangerous Miss Brodie into the secure shade of the elm. "Hold up your books," said Miss Brodie quite often that autumn. "If there are any intruders, we are doing our history lesson. Meantime, I will tell you about my last summer holiday in Egypt, about the Frenchman I met in the train to Biarritz, and I must tell you about the Italian paintings I saw. Who is the greatest Italian painter?" "Leonardo da Vinci, Miss Brodie." "That is incorrect. The answer is Giotto. He is my favourite. I have frequently told you, and the holidays just past have convinced me that my prime has truly begun. One's prime is the moment one was born for. Sandy, your attention is wandering. What have I been talking about? Your prime, Miss Brodie. If anyone comes along, said Miss Brodie, remember that it is the hour for English grammar. Meantime, I will tell you a little of my life when I was younger than I am now, though 6 years older than the man himself. She leaned against the elm. I was engaged to a young man at the beginning of the war, but he fell on Flanders Field. He fell like an autumn leaf, although he was only 22 years of age. The story of Miss Brodie's felled fiancé was well on its way when the headmistress, Miss Mackay, was seen to approach across the lawn. Tears had already started to drop from Sandy's little pig-like eyes. "What are you little girls crying for?" Miss Mackay said. "They are moved by a story I have been telling them. We are having a history lesson." "You did well," Miss Brodie said to the class when Miss Mackay had gone, "not to answer the question put to you. Speech is silver, but silence is golden. Mary, what was I saying?" Mary McGregor, who was later famous for being stupid and who, at the age of 23, lost her life in a hotel fire, ventured, "Golden." "What did I say was golden?" Sandy whispered, "The falling leaves." "The falling leaves." "Plainly, you were not listening to me. If only you small girls would listen to me, I would make of you the creme de la creme." Mary McGregor had not thought much about Jean Brodie when, a year after the outbreak of the Second World War, she joined the Wrens and was incompetent and much blamed. On one occasion of real misery, when her first and last boyfriend, a corporal, deserted her by failing to turn up at an appointed place, she thought back to see if she had ever really been happy in her life. It occurred to her then that the first years with Miss Brodie, sitting listening to all those stories and opinions which had nothing to do with the ordinary world, had been the happiest time of her life. She thought this briefly and relapsed into her habitual, slow bewilderment before she died while on leave in Cumberland, in a fire in the hotel. Back and forth along the corridors ran Mary McGregor through the thickening smoke. But at the beginning of the 1930s, when Mary McGregor was 10, there she was sitting blankly among Miss Brodie's pupils. "Who has spilled ink on the floor? Was it you, Mary? I have never come across such a clumsy girl." These were the days that Mary McGregor, on looking back, found to be the happiest days of her life. Sandy Stranger had a feeling at the time that they were supposed to be the happiest days of her life, and on her 10th birthday she said so to her best friend, Jenny Gray, who had been asked to tea. "Yes, they're always saying that," Jenny said. "Miss Brodie says prime is best," Sandy said. "Yes, but she never got married like our mothers and fathers." "They don't have primes," said Sandy. "They have sexual intercourse," Jenny said. The little girls paused, because this was still a stupendous thought, and one which they had only lately lit upon. Sandy said then, "Mr. Lloyd had a baby last week. He must have committed sex with his wife." This idea was easier to cope with, and they laughed screamingly into their pink paper napkins. Mr. Lloyd was the art master to the senior girls. Sandy opened the lid of the piano stool and extracted a notebook. On the first page of the notebook was written, "The Mountain Eerie" by Sandy Stranger and Jenny Gray. This was a story still in the process of composition, about Miss Brodie's lover, Hugh Carruthers. He had not been killed in the war. That was a mistake in the telegram. He had called to inquire for Miss Brodie at school, where Miss Mackay, the headmistress, had informed him that Miss Brodie loved another. With a bitter, harsh laugh, Hugh went and made his abode in a mountain eyrie, where, wrapped in a leather jacket, he had been discovered one day by Sandy and Jenny. Sandy took a pencil from a drawer in the sideboard. and continued. Miss Brodie ushered the girls from the music room and said, "You girls are my vocation. I am dedicated to you in my prime. Form a single file now, please, and walk with your heads up, up, like Sybil Thorndyke, a woman of noble mien." Sandy pointed her freckled nose in the air and fixed her little pig-like eyes on the ceiling as she walked along in the file. "One day, Sandy, you will go too far." Sandy looked hurt and puzzled. When they had returned to the classroom, Rose Stanley said, "I've got ink on my blouse." "Go to the science room and have the stain removed, but remember it is very bad for the tussor." Sometimes the girls would put a little spot of ink on a sleeve of their tussor silk blouses, so that they might be sent to the science room in the senior school. There, a thrilling teacher, a Miss Lockhart, wearing a white overall, would pour a small drop of white liquid from a large jar onto a piece of cotton wool. With this, she would dab the ink spot on the sleeve, intently absorbed in the task. Sandy and Jenny got ink on their blouses at discrete intervals of 4 weeks, so that they could go and have their arms held by Miss Lockhart, who seemed to carry 6 inches of pure air around her person wherever she moved in that strange-smelling room. Miss Brodie told her class, "You must be more careful with your ink. I can't have my girls going up and down to the science room like this." She added, "Art and religion first, then philosophy, then science." This was the first winter of the 2 years that this class spent with Miss Brodie. It had turned 1931. Miss Brodie had already selected her favourites, or rather, those whom she could trust. Miss Brodie's special girls were taken home to tea. They were taken into her confidence. They understood her private life and her feud with the headmistress. This was the beginning of the Brodie set. Eunice Gardner was so quiet at first it was difficult to see why she had been drawn in by Miss Brodie. But eventually she cut capers for the relief and amusement of the tea parties, doing cartwheels on the carpet. "You are an Ariel," said Miss Brodie. It was 28 years after Eunice did the splits in Miss Brodie's flat that she said to her husband, "Next year, when we go for the festival, remind me to go and visit Miss Brodie's grave." Who was Miss Brodie? A teacher of mine. She was an Edinburgh festival all on her own. She was forced to retire before time. The head never liked her. She was betrayed by one of her own girls. We were called the Brodie set. I never found out which one betrayed her. It is time now to speak of the long walk through the old parts of Edinburgh, where Miss Brodie took her set, dressed in their deep violet coats and black velour hats, one Friday in March, when the school's central heating system had broken down and everyone else had been sent home. The wind blew from the icy Forth, and the sky was loaded with forthcoming snow. Mary McGregor walked with Sandy because Jenny had gone home. Monica Douglas, later famous for being able to do real mathematics in her head and for her anger, walked behind them. By her side walked Rose Stanley, tall and blonde with a yellow-pale skin, who had not yet won her reputation for sex. With Rose walked Miss Brodie, head up like Sybil Thorndyke, her nose arched and proud. Behind Miss Brodie, last in the group, little Eunice Gardner, who 28 years later said of Miss Brodie, "I must visit her grave," gave a skip between each of her walking steps, so that Miss Brodie said from time to time, "Now, Eunice." Sandy, who had been reading Kidnapped, was having a conversation with the hero, Alan Breck. "Sandy, you must take this message o'er the heather to the Macphersons. My life depends on it, and the cause no less." "I shall never fail you, Alan Breck," said Sandy. "Mary," said Miss Brodie from behind, "please try not to lag behind Sandy." Their destination was the old town, for Miss Brodie had said they should see where history had been lived. As they came to the end of the meadows, a group of girl guides came by. "For those who like that sort of thing," said Miss Brodie in her best Edinburgh voice, "that is the sort of thing they like." So brownies and guides were ruled out. Sandy recalled Miss Brodie's admiration for Mussolini's marching troops, and the pictures she had brought back from Italy showing the triumphant march of the black uniforms in Rome. "These are the fascisti," said Miss Brodie, and spelt it out. It occurred to Sandy, there, at the end of the middle meadow walk, that the Brodie set was Miss Brodie's fascisti, all knit together for her need, and in another way, marching along. That was all right, but it seemed, too, that Miss Brodie's disapproval of the girl guides had jealousy in it. Perhaps the guides were too much of a rival fascisti. "We turn to the right," said Miss Brodie. They approached the old town, which none of the girls had properly seen before because none of their parents were so historically minded as to be moved to conduct their young into the reeking network of slums which the old town constituted in those years. It was Sandy's first experience of a foreign country, which intimates itself by its new smells and shapes, and its new poor. A man sat on the icy cold pavement. He just sat. Some boys shouted after Miss Brodie's violet-clad company with words that the girls had not heard before, but rightly understood to be obscene. Sandy found she was holding Mary's hand in her bewilderment. Many times throughout her life, Sandy knew with a shock that there were other people's Edinburghs quite different from hers, and with which she held only the names of districts and streets in common, so that, in her middle age, when she was at last allowed all those visitors to the convent, and when a man said, "I must have been at school in Edinburgh at the same time as you, Sister Helena," Sandy, who was now some years Sister Helena of the Transfiguration, clutched the bars of the grille and asked him to describe his school days and the Edinburgh he had known, and it turned out, once more, that his was a different Edinburgh from Sandy's. "I was once taken for a walk through the Canongate," Sandy said, "but I was frightened by the squalor." "Well, it was the 30s, said the man. "Tell me, Sister Helena, what would you say was your greatest influence during the 30s? Was it political, personal? Was it Calvinism?" "Oh, no," said Sandy. "But there was a Miss Jean Brodie in her prime." Their walk had brought them into broad Chambers Street. "I am summoned to see the headmistress at morning break on Monday," said Miss Brodie. "I have no doubt Miss Mackay wishes to question my methods of instruction. It has happened before, it will happen again. The word education comes from the root a from ex, out, and duco, I lead. It means a leading out. To me, education is a leading out of what is already there in the pupil's soul. Now, Miss Mackay has accused me of putting ideas into my girls' heads, but in fact that is her practice, and mine is quite the opposite." They had come to the end of Lauriston Place, where they were to get on a tramcar to go to tea with Miss Brodie in her flat at Church Hill. A very long queue of men lined this part of the street. They were without collars, in shabby suits. Monica Douglas whispered, "They are the idle." "In England they are called the unemployed. They are waiting to get their dole from the Labour Bureau," said Miss Brodie. "Sometimes they go and spend their dole on drink before they go home, and their children starve. They are our brothers. Sandy, stop staring at once. In Italy, the unemployment problem has been solved." Sandy felt that she was not staring across the road at the endless queue of brothers, but that it was pulling her eyes towards it. She saw it all of a piece, like one dragon's body which had no right to be in the city, and yet was unslayable. She thought of the starving children. This was a relief to her fear. She wanted to cry, as she always did when she saw a street singer or a beggar. She turned and said to Mary McGregor, who had brushed against her sleeve, "Stop pushing." "Mary, dear, you mustn't push." In the tramcar, Sandy excused herself from tea with Miss Brodie. She wanted at that moment to be warmly at home, outside which even the corporate Brodie set lived in a colder sort of way. But later, when Sandy thought of Eunice doing somersaults and splits on Miss Brodie's kitchen linoleum while the other girls washed up, she rather wished she had gone to tea at Miss Brodie's after all. She took out her secret notebook and added a chapter to the Mountain Eyrie, the true love story of Miss Jean Brodie. The days passed, and the wind blew from the Forth. It is not to be supposed that Miss Brodie was unique at this point of her prime. She was alone merely in that she taught in a school like Marcia Blaine's. There were legions of her kind during the 1930s, women from the age of 30 and upward who crowded their war-bereaved spinsterhood with voyages of discovery into new ideas and energetic practices in art or social welfare, education or religion. Some assisted in the Scottish national movement. They were not, however, committee women. They were not school teachers. The committee spinsters were sober churchgoers and quiet workers. The schoolmistresses were of a still more orderly type, living with aged parents and taking holidays at North Berwick. And so, seen in this light, there was nothing outwardly odd about Miss Brodie. Inwardly was a different matter, and it remained to be seen towards what extremities her nature worked her. The summer holidays of 1931 marked the first anniversary of the launching of Miss Brodie's prime. The year to come was in many ways the sexual year of the Brodie set. It was a crowded year of stirring revelations. The term opened vigorously as usual. Miss Brodie stood bronzed before her class and said, "I have spent most of my summer holidays in Italy once more, and a week in London, and I have brought back a great many pictures. Here is a larger formation of Mussolini's Fascisti. I went with my friends for an audience with the Pope. In London, my friends, who are well-to-do, took me to visit A. Milne. Mussolini is one of the greatest men in the world." "Good morning, Miss Brodie." "Good morning. Sit down, girls," said the headmistress, who had entered in a hurry. "Well, girls, this is the first day of the new session. Are we downhearted? No. You girls must work hard this year and pass your qualifying examination with flying colours. Next year you will be in the senior school, remember." When she had gone, Miss Brodie looked hard at the door for a long time. She turned back to the class and said, "Are we downhearted? No. As I was saying, Mussolini has performed feats of magnitude, and unemployment is even farther abolished under him than it was last year. I shall be able to tell you a great deal this term. Qualifying examination or no qualifying examination, you will have the benefit of my experiences in Italy." Even before the official opening of her prime, Miss Brodie's colleagues in the junior school had been gradually turning against her. There were two exceptions. One of these was Mr. Gordon Lowther, the singing master for the whole school. The other was Mr. Teddy Lloyd, the senior girls' art master. Both were already a little in love with Miss Brodie, but so far they had not engaged her attention as men. She knew them only as supporters and was proudly grateful. To the Brodie set, Gordon Lowther and Teddy Lloyd looked rather like each other, until habitual acquaintance proved that they looked very different. Both were red gold in colouring. Teddy Lloyd, the art master, was by far the better shaped, the better featured and the more sophisticated. Most wonderful of all, he had only one arm, the right, with which he painted. The other was a sleeve tucked into his pocket. He had lost the contents of the sleeve in the Great War. Miss Brodie's class had only once had an opportunity to size him up closely. They had been marched into the art room by Miss Brodie, where Mr. Lloyd showed his pictures from an exhibition of Italian art in London. He had a pointer with which he indicated the design of the picture. The ladies of the Primavera, in their netball-playing postures, provided Mr. Lloyd with much pointer work. He kept on passing the pointer along the lines of their bottoms. The third time he did this, a collective quiver of mirth ran along the front row of girls. Mr. Lloyd looked round with offended exasperation. "The Philistines are upon us, Mr. Lloyd," said Miss Brodie. It was not long after this that Monica Douglas claimed that she had seen Mr. Lloyd in the act of kissing Miss Brodie. There was a general excited difficulty in believing her. "When? Where?" "In the art room, after school yesterday." "How did you know they didn't see you?" Sandy said. "I got away before they turned round." Monica demonstrated her quick getaway. This was not dramatically satisfying to Sandy, who went out of the classroom, opened the door, looked, opened her eyes in a startled way, gasped and retreated in a flash. Miss Brodie came up from behind her. "What are you doing, Sandy?" "Only playing," said Sandy, photographing this new Miss Brodie with her little eyes. The question of whether Miss Brodie was actually capable of being kissed and of kissing occupied the Brodie set till Christmas. There was indeed a change in Miss Brodie. She wore newer clothes and with them a glowing amber necklace. The other junior school teachers said good morning to Miss Brodie these days in a more than Edinburgh manner. That is to say, it was gracious enough, but Sandy, who had turned 11, perceived that the tone of morning in good morning made the word seem purposely to rhyme with scorning. Miss Brodie did not frequent the staff common rooms when her class was taking its singing or sewing lessons, but accompanied them. The two sewing teachers, Miss Ellen and Miss Alison Kerr, were incapable of imparting any information whatsoever. Therefore the sewing lessons were a great relaxation to all, and Miss Brodie used the sewing period to read Jane Eyre to her class. The singing lessons were far different. Some weeks after the report of her kissing in the art room, it gradually became plain that Miss Brodie was agitated before, during and after the singing lessons. Sandy said to Monica Douglas, "Are you sure it was Mr. Lloyd who kissed her? Are you sure it wasn't Mr. Lowther?" "It was Mr. Lloyd with his one arm round her. I'm sorry I ever told you." When she visited Sandy at the nunnery in the late 1950s, Monica said, "I really did see Teddy Lloyd kiss Miss Brodie in the art room one day." "I know you did," said Sandy. She knew it even before Miss Brodie had told her so, one day after the end of the war, when they sat in the Braid Hills Hotel. Miss Brodie sat shrivelled and betrayed in her dark muskwash coat. "Teddy Lloyd was greatly in love with me, as you know. One day in the art room he kissed me, but I renounced him. He was a married man. I renounced the great love of my prime." She had reckoned on her prime lasting till she was 60, but this, the year after the war, was in fact Miss Brodie's last and 56th year. She was suffering from an internal growth. This was her last year in the world, and in another sense, it was Sandy's. In the late autumn of 1931, Miss Brodie was away from school for 2 weeks. In the meantime, the Brodie set were placed with a gaunt woman who was in fact a Miss Gaunt from the Western Isles. On Thursday they were herded into the sewing room. Miss Alison and Miss Ellen Kerr seemed rather cowed by gaunt Miss Gaunt. Sandy was thinking of the next instalment of Jane Eyre. She had done with Alan Breck, and had taken up with Mr. Rochester, with whom she now sat in the garden. A phrase of Miss Gaunt's broke upon the garden scene. "Mr. Lowther is not at school this week." "Miss Brodie is ailing too," said Miss Ellen. "Yes," said Miss Gaunt. "It may be that Miss Brodie has the same complaint as Mr. Lowther." Sandy saw her face as that of the housekeeper in Jane Eyre, watching her carefully and knowingly. "Perhaps Miss Brodie is having a love affair with Mr. Lowther," Sandy said to Jenny, to break up the sexless gloom that surrounded them. "But it was Mr. Lloyd who kissed her. She must be in love with Mr. Lloyd, or she wouldn't have let him kiss her. Perhaps she is working it off on Mr. Lowther. Mr. Lowther isn't married." Jenny whispered, "They go to bed, then their toes touch, and then Miss Brodie—" "Quiet! Eunice is coming." Eunice had lately taken a religious turn, and there was no talking about sex in front of her. In the year after the war, when Sandy sat with Miss Brodie in the window of the Braid Hills Hotel, Miss Brodie said, "I renounced Teddy Lloyd, but in the autumn of 1931 I entered an affair with Gordon Lowther. He was a bachelor, and it was more becoming. That is the whole story." "Are you listening, Sandy?" "Yes, I'm listening." Sandy was thinking it was not the whole story. "Of course, the liaison was suspected, but it was not on those grounds that I was betrayed. I should like to know who betrayed me. I often wonder if it was poor Mary." The whine in her voice, betrayed me, bored and afflicted Sandy. "It is 7 years," thought Sandy, "since I betrayed this tiresome woman." After her 2 weeks' absence, Miss Brodie returned to tell her class that she had enjoyed an exciting rest, and a well-earned one. Mr. Lowther's singing class went on as usual, and he beamed at Miss Brodie as she brought them proudly into the music room with their heads up, up. Sandy was almost as sure as could be that the singing master was in love with Miss Brodie, and that Miss Brodie was in love with the art master. During the Easter term, Miss Mackay, the headmistress, had the girls in to tea in her study. This was a routine of inquiry as to their intentions for the senior school, whether they would go on the modern side, or whether they would apply for admission to the classical. Miss Brodie had already prompted them as follows. "I am not saying anything against the modern side. Not everyone is capable of a classical education. You must make your choice quite freely." So that the girls were left in no doubt as to Miss Brodie's contempt for the modern side. From among her special set, only Eunice Gardner stood out to be a modern. Eunice, preparing arduously for confirmation, was still a bit too pious for Miss Brodie's liking. When Miss Brodie herded her set to the Empire Theatre to witness the dancing of Pavlova, Eunice was absent. The term was filled with legends of Pavlova and her dedicated habits. "You must all grow up to be dedicated women, as I have dedicated myself to you." A few weeks before she died, when, sitting up in the nursing home, she learned from Monica Douglas that Sandy had gone to a convent, she said, "That is not the sort of dedication I meant. Do you think she has done this to annoy me? I begin to wonder if it was not Sandy who betrayed me." The headmistress asked Sandy, Jenny and Mary the usual questions about what they wanted to do in the senior school. When Jenny and Sandy opted for classical, Miss Mackay transparently started to win over the girls by praising Miss Brodie. Miss Brodie took them to the theatre, the art galleries, to Miss Brodie's flat for tea. "That's splendid. And Miss Brodie is very musical, I believe." "I think Miss Brodie is more interested in art, ma'am," said Sandy. "Very enlightening." She asked no further questions, but made the following noteworthy speech. "You are very fortunate in Miss Brodie. You will have to work hard at ordinary, humble subjects for the qualifying examination. Miss Brodie is giving you an excellent preparation for the senior school. Culture cannot compensate for lack of hard knowledge. I'm happy to see you are devoted to Miss Brodie. Your loyalty is due to the school rather than to any one individual." Not all of this conversation was reported back to Miss Brodie. Towards the end of the Easter holidays, to crown the sex-laden year, Jenny, out walking alone, was accosted by a man joyfully exposing himself beside the water of Leith. Jenny escaped unharmed, though breathless. Later in the day came a wonderful policewoman to question Jenny, and although Sandy never saw her, she quite deserted Alan Breck and Mr. Rochester and fell in love with the unseen policewoman. Sandy decided to call her Sergeant Anne Grey. Sandy was Anne Grey's right-hand woman in the force, and they were dedicated to eliminate sex from Edinburgh and environs. "Intimacy has undoubtedly taken place," said Sergeant Anne, looking very nice in her dark uniform. "All we need are a few incriminating documents." "Leave all that to me, Sergeant Anne," said Sandy, because she was, at that very time, engaged with Jenny in composing the love correspondence between Miss Brodie and the singing master. At school, the Water of Leith affair was kept a secret between Jenny and Sandy, for Jenny's mother had said the story must not be spread about. Something made Sandy say to Jenny on the first afternoon of the term, "Don't tell Miss Brodie." Why? Sandy tried to work out the reason. It was connected with the fact that Miss Brodie had told her class, "I have spent Easter at the little Roman village of Cramond." That was where Mr. Lowther lived, all alone in a big house with a housekeeper. It was also connected with something that had happened in the course of the morning when Miss Brodie, wanting a supply of drawing books and charcoal to start the new term, sent Monica Douglas to fetch them from the art room, then called her back and sent Rose Stanley instead. When Rose returned, she was followed by Teddy Lloyd. Miss Brodie put her arm round Rose's shoulder and thanked Mr. Lloyd for his help, as if she and Rose were one. During the last few months of Miss Brodie's teaching, she monopolised with her class the benches under the elm. Miss Brodie's old love story was newly embroidered with curious threads. It appeared that while on leave from the war, her late fiancé had frequently taken her out sailing in a fishing boat. Sometimes Hugh would sing. He had a rich tenor voice. At other times he would set up his easel and paint. This was the first the girls had heard of Hugh's artistic leanings. Sandy puzzled over this and took counsel with Jenny, and it came to them both that Miss Brodie was making her new love story fit the old. Sandy was divided between her admiration for the technique and the pressing need to prove Miss Brodie guilty of misconduct. "What about those incriminating documents?" said Sergeant Anne Grey in her jolly, friendly manner. She really was very thrilling. Sandy and Jenny completed the love correspondence between Miss Brodie and the singing master at half-term. They were staying on the coast of Fife with Jenny's aunt, and sat at the mouth of a cave to finish the work. That intimacy had taken place was to be established, but not on an ordinary bed. The last letter in the series went as follows. "My own delightful Gordon, alas, I must ever decline to be Mrs. Lowther. My reasons are twofold. I am dedicated to my girls, as is Madame Pavlova, and there is another in my life whose mutual love reaches out to me beyond the bounds of time and space. He is Teddy Lloyd. But I was proud of giving myself to you in the bracken on Arthur's Seat. Allow me, in conclusion, to congratulate you warmly upon your sexual intercourse, as well as your singing. Jean Brodie. When they had finished writing this letter, Sandy found a damp hole at the back of the cave, and they pressed into it the notebook containing the love correspondence of Miss Jean Brodie, and never saw it again. I have enough gunpowder in this jar to blow up this school, said Miss Lockhart in even tones. She stood behind her bench in her white linen coat, with both hands on a glass jar, 3/4 full of a dark grey powder. She was quite the nicest teacher in the senior school. They were all the nicest teachers in the school. It was a new life altogether, almost a new school. Here were no gaunt mistresses like Miss Gaunt, those many who had stalked past Miss Brodie in the corridors saying, "Good morning," with predestination in their smiles. The Brodie set might easily have lost its identity at this time, not only because Miss Brodie had ceased to preside over their days, but also because the headmistress intended them to be dispersed. She laid a scheme, and it failed. There was a highly competitive house system in the senior school. Miss Mackay saw to it that the Brodie girls were as far as possible placed in different houses. It was the team spirit, they were told, that counted now. This phrase was enough for the Brodie set, who, after 2 years at Miss Brodie's, had been well directed as to its meaning. Phrases like the team spirit are always employed to cut across individualism, love, and personal loyalties, she had said. Florence Nightingale knew nothing of the team spirit. Her mission was to save life, regardless of the team to which it belonged. Cleopatra knew nothing of the team spirit, if you read your Shakespeare. Where would the team spirit have got Sybil Thorndike? She is the great actress, and the rest of the cast have got the team spirit. The Brodie set would as soon have entered the Girl Guides as the team spirit. No one, save Eunice Gardner, got near to being put in any team. Everyone agreed that Eunice was so good on the field that she could not help it. On most Saturday afternoons, Miss Brodie entertained her old set to tea and listened to their new experiences. There was always a great deal to tell about the art lesson. Their first day, Mr. Lloyd found difficulty in keeping order. He was attempting to explain the nature and appearance of an ellipse by holding up a saucer in his one right hand. "If you girls don't shut up, I'll smash this saucer to the floor," he said. They tried but failed to shut up. He smashed the saucer to the floor. Amid the dead silence which followed, he said, "You, with the profile, pick this up." He turned away while the girls looked anew at Rose Stanley's profile. "He has an artistic temperament, of course," said Miss Brodie, and she looked at Rose in a special way, while Sandy looked at Miss Brodie. The interest of Sandy and Jenny in Miss Brodie's lovers had entered a new phase since they had moved up to the senior school. They no longer saw everything in a sexual context. It was now rather a question of plumbing the deep heart's core. "I feel I'm past it," said Jenny. This was strangely true, and she did not again experience her early sense of erotic wonder in life, until suddenly, one day, when she was nearly 40, an actress of moderate reputation. It happened she was standing with a man whom she did not know very well, outside a famous building in Rome, waiting for the rain to stop. She was surprised by a reawakening of that same buoyant and airy discovery of sex. There was nothing whatever to be done about it, for Jenny had been contentedly married for 16 years past, but the concise happening filled her with a sense of the hidden possibilities in all things. "Mr. Lowther's housekeeper," said Miss Brodie one Saturday afternoon, "has left him. I think she resented my position as Mr. Lowther's friend and confidant." The next Saturday she told the girls that the sewing sisters, Miss Ellen and Miss Alison Kerr, had taken on the temporary task of housekeepers to Mr. Lowther since they lived near Crammond. "I think those sisters are inquisitive," Miss Brodie remarked. "They're too much in with Miss Gaunt and the Church of Scotland." Up to now, Miss Brodie's visits to Mr. Lowther had taken place on Sundays. She always went to church on Sunday mornings. She had a rota of different denominations and sects, which included the Free Churches of Scotland, the Methodist and Episcopalian churches, and any other church outside the Roman Catholic pale. Her disapproval of the Church of Rome was based on her assertions that it was a church of superstition. In some ways, her attitude was a strange one, because she was by temperament suited only to the Roman Catholic Church. Possibly it could have embraced, even while it disciplined, her soaring and diving spirit. But she was not in any doubt that God was on her side whatever her course, and so she experienced no difficulty or sense of hypocrisy in worship, while at the same time she went to bed with the singing master. Miss Brodie spent Sunday evenings with Mr. Lowther also, and more often than not the night, in a spirit of definite duty, if not exactly martyrdom, since her heart was with the renounced teacher of art. When it became certain that the Kerr sisters had taken over permanently the housekeeping for this bashful, smiling bachelor, Miss Brodie fancied he was getting thin. "I have no faith in those Kerr sisters. They are skimping him. They have got skimpy minds." She decided to supervise the Kerr sisters on their Saturdays at Crammond. They took Miss Brodie's intrusion quite meekly. The Brodie set was invited to go, one pair, every week, to visit her in Mr. Lowther's residence. One day, when Sandy and Jenny were on the visiting rota, she gave Mr. Lowther, for tea alone, an admirable lobster salad, some sandwiches of liver paste, cake and tea, followed by a bowl of porridge and cream. He worked his way through everything with impassive obedience while she questioned the girls. "Mr. Lloyd, is he well?" "Oh, yes, he's great fun. He showed us his studio 2 weeks ago." "Which studio? Where? At his house?" Although Miss Brodie knew perfectly well. "Did you meet his wife? What was she like?" She did not attempt to conceal from her munching host her keen interest in the art master. "Gordon, a cake. It is full of goodness." And she made him eat a Chester cake, and spoke to him in a slightly more Edinburgh way than usual, so as to make up to him by both means for the love she was giving to Teddy Lloyd, instead of to him. Sandy loitered at the kitchen door, waiting for Miss Brodie to come for a walk by the sea. Miss Brodie was doing something to an enormous ham, prior to putting it into a huge pot. "I must get this on for Mr. Lowther's supper," she said to Sandy, "before I go home tonight." She always, so far, kept up the idea that she went home on these weekend nights and left Mr. Lowther alone in the big house. A little later, Miss Ellen Kerr was brought to the headmistress by Miss Gaunt to testify to having found Miss Brodie's nightdress under a pillow of the double bed on which Mr. Lowther took his sleep. "How do you know the nightdress was Miss Brodie's?" demanded Miss Mackay, who smelt her prey very near and yet saw it very far. "It is non-proven." All this was conveyed to Sandy by the headmistress herself, at that subsequent time when Sandy looked at her distastefully through her little eyes, and was moved, by various other considerations, to betray Miss Brodie. "But I must organise the dear fellow's food before I go home tonight," Miss Brodie said in the summer of 1933, while Sandy leaned against the kitchen door, with her legs longing to be running along the seashore. Jenny came and joined her. All along the seafront, Miss Brodie questioned the girls about Teddy Lloyd's house, how vast and light was the studio, and what was said. "There is a new portrait," Jenny said, "not finished yet, of Rose." "Rose has been sitting for him." Miss Brodie was very excited. "Have you not thought it remarkable?" that it is you 6 girls that Mr. Lloyd has chosen to invite to his studio." "Well, we're a set," said Jenny. "It is because you are mine," said Miss Brodie. "I mean of my stamp and cut, and I am in my prime." Suddenly, like migrating birds, Sandy and Jenny ran along the pebbly beach into the air, returning to Miss Brodie to hear of her forthcoming summer holiday, when she was going to leave the fattened-up Mr. Lowther to fend for himself with the aid of the Mrs. Kerr, and was going abroad, not to Italy this year, but to Germany, where Hitler was become Chancellor, a prophet figure, and more reliable than Mussolini. "Why, it's like Miss Brodie," said Sandy. "It's terribly like Miss Brodie." Then, perceiving that what she had said had accumulated a meaning between its passing her lips and reaching the ears of Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd, she said, "Though of course it's Rose, it's terribly like Rose." Teddy Lloyd shifted the new portrait so that it stood in a different light. It still looked like Miss Brodie. Deirdre Lloyd said, "I haven't met Miss Brodie. Is she fair?" "No," said Teddy Lloyd. "She's dark." Sandy saw that the head on the portrait was fair. It was Rose's portrait, all right. Where was the resemblance to Miss Brodie? It was the profile, perhaps. It was the type of stare from Rose's blue eyes, perhaps, which was like the dominating stare from Miss Brodie's brown. The portrait was very like Miss Brodie. Then Sandy saw a drawing. It was Miss Brodie, leaning against a lamp-post in the Lawn Market. On looking closer, it proved to be Monica Douglas, with the high cheekbones and long nose. "I didn't know Monica sat for you." "I've done 1 or 2 preliminary sketches. Here's one of Eunice in her harlequin outfit." Sandy was vexed. These girls, Monica and Eunice, had not said anything to the others about their being painted by the art master. Small and neat and sharp-featured as she was, in the portrait, Eunice looked like Miss Brodie. In amongst her various bewilderments, Sandy was fascinated by the economy of Teddy Lloyd's method, as she had been 4 years earlier by Miss Brodie's variations on her love story, when she had attached to her first wartime lover the attributes of the art master and the singing master. From somewhere below, one of the Lloyd children started to yell. Deirdre Lloyd disappeared. "One day I would like to do all you Brodie girls, one by one, and then all together." "We'd look like one big Miss Brodie, I suppose." He laughed in a delighted way, and looked at her more closely, as if for the first time. She looked back just as closely through her little eyes, with their near blackmailing insolence of her knowledge. Whereupon he kissed her long and wetly. "That'll teach you to look at an artist like that." She started to run to the door, but he caught her with his one arm. "There's no need to run away. You're just about the ugliest little thing I've ever seen in my life." Mr. Lowther had caused Miss Brodie a good deal of worry in the past 2 years. There had been a time when it seemed he might be thinking of marrying Miss Alison Kerr, and another time when he seemed to favour Miss Ellen, all the while being in love with Miss Brodie herself, who refused him all but her bedfellowship and her catering. Most of this Miss Brodie obliquely confided in the girls, as they grew from 13 to 14, and from 14 to 15. She was still testing them out to see whom she could trust. Miss Brodie started to confide in Sandy after the next summer holidays. They played rounds of golf in the sunny early autumn after school. "All my ambitions are fixed on yourself and Rose. You will not speak of this to the other girls. It would cause envy. You have got insight, and Rose has got instinct." Fully to savour her position, Sandy would go and stand outside St Giles Cathedral or the toll booth and contemplate those emblems of a dark and terrible salvation which made the fires of the damned seem very merry by contrast. Nobody in her life, at home or at school, had ever spoken of Calvinism except as a joke that had once been taken seriously. All she was conscious of now was that some quality of life peculiar to Edinburgh had been going on, unbeknown to her all the time, and she felt deprived of it. In some ways, the most real and rooted people whom Sandy knew were Miss Gaunt and the Kerr sisters, who made no evasions about their belief that God had planned for practically everybody before they were born a nasty surprise when they died. Sandy was unable to formulate these exciting propositions. Nevertheless, she smelt them in the excesses of Miss Brodie in her prime, who had elected herself to grace in so particular a way. It was plain that Miss Brodie wanted Rose, with her instinct, to start preparing to be Teddy Lloyd's lover, and Sandy, with her insight, to act as informant on the affair. There was a whiff of sulphur about the idea which fascinated Sandy in her present mind. Meanwhile, Miss Brodie was neglecting Mr Lowther at Crammond and spending as much time as possible with Rose and Sandy, discussing art and the necessity for Rose to realise the power she had within her. Miss Brodie was too cautious to be more precise, and Rose only half guessed at Miss Brodie's meaning, for she was at this time, as Sandy knew, following her instinct and becoming famous for sex among the schoolboys who stood awkwardly at the school gates. Rose was greatly popular with these boys, although she did not really talk about sex, far less indulge it. Sandy felt warmly towards Miss Brodie when she saw how she was misled in her idea of Rose. It was then that Miss Brodie looked beautiful and fragile, just as dark, heavy Edinburgh itself could suddenly be changed into a floating city when the light was a special pearly white. "If they do not try to unseat me on the grounds of my educational policy, they attempt personal calumny," said Miss Brodie one day. "There have been implications against my character in regard to my relations with poor Mr Lowther. However, I shall survive it. If I wished, I could marry him tomorrow." The morning after this saying, the engagement of Gordon Lowther to Miss Lockhart, the science teacher, was announced in the Scotsman. Nobody had expected it. Miss Brodie was greatly taken aback, but she seemed to recall herself to the fact that the true love of her life was Teddy Lloyd, whom she had renounced, and Gordon Lowther had merely been useful. The Brodie girls, now that they were 17, were able to detach Miss Brodie from her aspect of teacher. When they conferred amongst themselves on the subject, they had to admit that she was really an exciting woman as a woman. One of her greatest admirers was the new girl called Joyce Emily Hammond, who had been sent to Blaine School as a last hope because of her alleged delinquency. One of Joyce Emily's boasts was that her brother at Oxford had gone to fight in the Spanish Civil War. This dark, rather mad girl wanted to go too, and to wear a black skirt and march with a gun. Nobody had taken this seriously. Everyone was anti-Franco if they were anything at all. One day it was realised that Joyce Emily had not been at school for some days. 6 weeks later, it was reported that she had run away to Spain and had been killed in an accident when the train she was travelling in had been attacked. The school held an abbreviated form of remembrance service for her. Mary had gone to be a shorthand typist, and Jenny had gone to a school of dramatic art. Only 4 remained of the Brodie set for the last year. It was hardly like being at school at all. There was so much free time for the 6th form girls. Eunice was to do modern languages. Monica was destined for science, Sandy for psychology. Rose hung on because her father thought she should get the best out of her education. Rose followed her instinct and made a good marriage soon after she left school. She shook off Miss Brodie's influence as a dog shakes pond water from its coat. Miss Brodie was not to know that this would be, and said to Sandy, "From what you tell me, I should think that Rose and Teddy Lloyd will soon be lovers." Sandy looked at her and perceived that the woman was obsessed by the need for Rose to sleep with the man she herself was in love with. "She thinks she is Providence," thought Sandy. "She thinks she is the god of Calvin. She sees the beginning and the end." In the summer of 1938, after the last of the Brodie set had left Blaine, Miss Brodie went to Germany and Austria, while Sandy read psychology and went to the Lloyds to sit for her own portrait. When Deirdre Lloyd took the children into the country, Teddy had to stay on in Edinburgh because he was giving a summer course at the art school. One day, when they were alone, Sandy told Teddy Lloyd that all his portraits, even that of the littlest Lloyd baby, were now turning out to be likenesses of Miss Brodie, and she gave him her insolent, blackmailing stare. He kissed her, as he had done 3 years before when she was 15, and for the best part of 5 weeks of the summer they had a love affair in the empty house. Miss Brodie telephoned for Sandy to come to see her early in September. "Rose tells me you have become his lover." "Yes. Does it matter which one of us it is?" "Whatever possessed you?" said Miss Brodie in a very Scottish way. "A girl with a mind, a girl with insight." The more Sandy discovered Teddy Lloyd to be still in love with Jean Brodie, the more she was curious about the mind that loved the woman. By the end of the year, it happened that she had quite lost interest in the man himself, but was deeply absorbed in his mind, from which she extracted, among other things, his religion. She left the man and took his religion, and became a nun in the course of time. But that autumn, Sandy met Miss Brodie several times. "His portraits still resemble me?" "Yes, very much." "Then all is well. I wanted Rose for him, I admit, and sometimes I regretted urging young Joyce Emily to go to Spain to fight for Franco. She would have done admirably for him, a girl of instinct." "Did she go to fight for Franco?" "That was the intention. I made her see sense. However, she didn't have the chance to fight at all, poor girl." When Sandy returned, as was expected of her, to see Miss Mackay that autumn, the headmistress said, "I'm afraid she put ideas into your young heads." "Yes, lots of ideas." "I wish I knew what some of them were," said Miss Mackay, slumping a little and genuinely worried. "Because she has formed a new set, and they are so out of key with the rest of the school. They are precocious. Do you know what I mean?" "Yes," said Sandy, "but you won't be able to pin her down on sex. Have you thought of politics?" Miss Mackay turned her chair so that it was nearly square with Sandy's. "My dear, what do you mean?" "She's a born fascist. Have you thought of that?" Miss Brodie was forced to retire at the end of the summer term of 1939, on the grounds that she had been teaching fascism. "Of course," said Miss Brodie, when she wrote to tell Sandy the news of her retirement, "this political question was only an excuse. It was my educational policy they were up against, which had reached its perfection in my prime. I was dedicated to my girls, as you know. What hurts and amazes me most of all is the fact, if Miss Mackay is to be believed, that it was one of my own set who betrayed me. Perhaps Mary has nursed a grievance in her stupidity of mind against me." It may be that Rose resented my coming first with Mr. L. Eunice was attracted to the team spirit. Could it be that Eunice bore a grudge? Do you think Jenny minded my telling her that she would never be a Fay Compton, far less a Sybil Thorndyke? It may be that in a fit of rage against beauty, truth, and goodness, Monica turned and betrayed me. You, Sandy, I exempt from suspicion, since you had no reason whatsoever to betray me. Indeed, you have had the best part of me in my confidences, and in the man I love. She heard again from Miss Brodie at the time of Mary McGregor's death, in the hotel fire. If this is a judgment on poor Mary for betraying me, I would not have wished. When Jenny came to see Sandy, who now bore the name Sister Helena of the Transfiguration, she told Sandy about her sudden falling in love with a man in Rome. Miss Brodie would have liked to know about it, sinner as she was. Oh, she was quite an innocent in her way, said Sandy, clutching the bars of the grill. Eunice, when she came, told Sandy, "We were at the Edinburgh Festival last year. I found Miss Brodie's grave. I put some flowers on it. I've told my husband all the stories about her. He thinks she was marvellous fun." So she was, really, when you think of it. Monica came to visit. Before she died, Miss Brodie thought it was you who betrayed her. It's only possible to betray where loyalty is due, said Sandy. And there was that day when the inquiring young man came to see Sandy because of her strange book of psychology, The Transfiguration of the Commonplace, which had brought so many visitors that Sandy clutched the bars of her grill more desperately than ever. What were the main influences of your school days, Sister Helena? Were they literary or political or personal? Was it Calvinism? Sandy said, "There was a Miss Jean Brodie in her prime."